Most people imagine a medieval monastery as a quiet place where monks simply prayed and copied books. This image is incredibly far from the harsh reality of that time. In reality, they were veritable survival camps where the human body was pushed to its limits every day. Scholars studying the daily routine of a medieval monk often compare it to the training of elite military units. Surviving there required not only enduring the cold, but also enduring voluntary, almost insane deprivations. It sounds unbelievable, but let's look at the facts. We're used to thinking that real trials were reserved only for knights or simple peasants. But here's the thing. Monks voluntarily subjected themselves to physical and psychological stresses that today would be called sophisticated torture. They lived in conditions of constant sleep deprivation, grueling physical labor, and the strictest, meager diet. Today, we'll peek behind the thick stone walls of these fortresses of faith and examine their daily lives through the lens of modern science. And believe me, this reality will make you look at those dark ages of history in a whole new light. The main enemy of the medieval monk was not hidden behind the monastery walls, but within his own schedule. And this is where things get really interesting. Their day began deep in the night, around 2 o'clock, for the first prayer. Why did they choose such a strange and inconvenient time to wake up regularly? The answer lies in their attempt to fully subordinate their physiology to the higher spiritual goals of the Brotherhood. The human brain is programmed for uninterrupted nighttime rest to allow for the normal restoration of all neural connections. But these people practiced what is known as segmented sleep, interrupting it during its deepest phase. They slept for a few hours in the early evening, woke up for prayer, and then went back to sleep until dawn. Modern sleep specialists call such a regimen a sure path to chronic stress and nervous system exhaustion. But for the abbey's inhabitants, it was a strict routine, repeated for decades without a single day off. Your modern insomnia would seem to them merely a light warm-up before the real trials. Winter nights in the stone cells of Europe added a monstrous, piercing cold to the constant lack of sleep. The temperature inside the vast rooms often dropped well below freezing. People had to stand on the icy stone floor for several hours at a time during night services. Why did they have to freeze so cruelly instead of lighting a fire? Suffering was considered the best way to purify the soul, and the biting cold simply helped to keep them from falling asleep while standing. Today, people buy expensive weighted blankets and orthopedic pillows to help them fall asleep. Monastery dwellers slept in their thick day clothes on hard, prickly straw mattresses. They did not take off their coarse woolen robes for years, so as to always be ready for immediate service. This is very similar to how modern firefighters sleep while waiting for a nighttime alarm. The only difference is that firefighters' shifts eventually end, whereas here, the watch lasted for the rest of their lives. Constant, severe sleep deprivation led to a dangerous state of chronic semi-delirium. Science proves that prolonged sleep deprivation causes mild auditory hallucinations and altered consciousness. Historians believe that many divine visions were simply the result of an extremely exhausted brain. If you don't sleep properly for a whole month, you too will start seeing angels in the corners of a dark room. After a long morning prayer, it was time for hard physical labor, which no one ever canceled. Monasteries had to provide for themselves absolutely everything they needed, from fresh bread to building materials. Have you ever tried chopping wood after 3 hours of fitful, restless sleep? It's interesting to look at actual life expectancy under such incredibly extreme conditions. One would think that under such a regime, people would drop dead by the age of 30 from exhaustion. But here's what's truly astonishing and defies all our logical expectations. Many abbots and ordinary monks lived to be 70 or even 80 years old. The secret lay in the predictability of the routine and relative protection from frequent external epidemics. Their bodies adapted to the strain, much like the organisms of professional, endurance-trained marathon runners. Modern people very often complain of severe burnout from simple office work. Imagine the real burnout from transcribing books by dim candlelight in a room without any heating. The work of the scriptorium, where valuable manuscripts were created, was a truly grueling physical ordeal. Scribes sat on hard wooden benches for 10 hours at a time, straining their eyes incredibly in the dim light. One medieval scribe left a note stating that this work ruins the back and clouds the eyes. The science of ergonomics today perfectly explains why sitting without back support is very harmful to the spine. Scribes often developed severe spinal curvature and chronic joint diseases in their hands. They held heavy quills at an awkward angle to prevent ink from accidentally dripping onto the expensive parchment. This is essentially an ancient and very painful form of carpal tunnel syndrome, compounded by arthritis. Only instead of paid sick leave, they were simply given a new stack of blank sheets of parchment. And this entire arduous work process always took place in absolute, deathly silence. Many orders enforced a strict vow of silence, which was forbidden to break under threat of punishment. Psychologists know full well that sensory and social deprivation has a devastating effect on the human psyche. To communicate about their work, the copyists devised an incredibly complex system of sign language. They created their own nonverbal code hundreds of years before the emergence of modern sign languages. This was a brilliant solution for survival under conditions of artificially created, strict social isolation. The issue of nutrition behind those high walls shatters all our modern stereotypes about a healthy lifestyle. Their basic diet was built on principles that would today send shivers down the spine of any nutritionist. The foundation of their daily diet consisted of coarse ground flour bread, vegetables, and enormous quantities of beer. Why did thick beer suddenly become the main drink of these holy fathers? The answer lies in the appalling bacteriological quality of medieval fresh drinking water. Drinking raw river water meant playing Russian roulette with cholera and deadly dysentery. The long beer brewing process included mandatory boiling, which reliably killed all deadly bacteria. In addition, monastic beer was very thick and contained many beneficial, complex carbohydrates. It served not merely as an alcoholic beverage, but as true liquid bread, providing energy for hard labor. In some abbeys, the daily ration reached 4 full liters per adult. A modern laborer would struggle to drink that much kvass during a long shift. Yet these people did so daily, remarkably maintaining a clear mind and steady gait. But things get even more interesting when you consider the numerous long days of fasting. They had to fast for more than half the days of the year, completely excluding any meat or animal fats. How do you keep your energy levels high when you're working in the fields and sleeping only 4 hours a night? They circumvented strict rules with incredible ingenuity and very clever tricks. For example, beavers were officially recognized as fish because of their scaly tails and aquatic lifestyle. Thus, medieval logic deftly adapted to the harsh demands of religion for the sake of survival. The meat of 4-legged animals was strictly forbidden by the original ancient rules of St. Benedict. But birds flew freely in the sky, so their meat was often considered perfectly acceptable for the weak and sick. As a result, abbeys began building giant stone dovecotes for mass bird breeding. Religion is one thing, but the exhausted body needed high-quality protein to repair torn muscles. Otherwise, working with a heavy hammer in the forge or hauling sacks at the mill would have been physically impossible. Another life-saving source of survival was the vast indoor gardens and medicinal vegetable plots. There they grew cabbage, beans, onions, and bitter garlic on a truly industrial scale. Modern nutritionists would call this an excellent vegan diet, incredibly rich in plant fiber. Beans provided plant protein, which at least partially compensated for the acute shortage of meat. But it was extremely difficult for the gastrointestinal tract to cope with such a large amount of coarse, fibrous food. Constant digestive problems were a true occupational hazard of those harsh times. It was especially hard for workers during the longest and strictest period of Lent. During this spring season, calorie intake plummeted to a critically low level. Maintaining performance under such a prolonged energy deficit is no easy task. The body inevitably begins to burn its own muscles just to maintain basic metabolism. Modern bodybuilders use this dangerous method before competitions to achieve maximum leanness. The inhabitants of the cells, however, starve themselves simply for the sake of saving their souls, teetering on the brink of fainting from severe hunger. Interestingly, the abbey kitchen was often a separate, remarkable feat of engineering. In France, a gigantic stone kitchen with enormous exhaust pipes of precise aerodynamic shape has been preserved. There, hot meals were prepared for hundreds of people at once, which required simply flawless logistics. This was essentially the ancient Stone Age equivalent of modern factory kitchens or large centralized restaurant chains. They successfully established mass production of calories long before the invention of the industrial assembly line. In those dark times, sugar was incredibly rare and cost a fortune at the markets. Therefore, the main source of quick carbohydrate energy was thick honey from their own large apiaries. The brothers became outstanding beekeeping experts, thoroughly studying the habits of bees through trial and error. Honey was used both as an excellent sweetener and as a reliable remedy for treating open wounds. Scientists today fully confirm that natural raw honey possesses powerful antibacterial properties. It is an ideal natural antiseptic that was always at hand when needed. The food storage system is also incredibly impressive in its scale and architectural ingenuity. Huge, deep, cool cellars served as giant refrigerators where the temperature always remained stable. They salted, smoked, and fermented in barrels absolutely everything they could grow during the short summer. Without these colossal reserves, surviving the long, harsh winter would have been physically impossible. Any modern large family would envy such a massive pantry in case of a nuclear apocalypse. The resilience of these systems allowed closed communities to easily survive long years of the most severe crop failures. As a result, the entire diet of the inhabitants of such places represented a very strange balance of extremes. On the one hand, it involved voluntary suffering, deprivation, and incredibly harsh restrictions. On the other hand, it was a stable and reliable source of food in a cruel world where constant hunger reigned. An ordinary peasant could easily die from a crop failure, while stone granaries always held a life-saving reserve of grain. It was a harsh price to pay for giving up personal freedom in exchange for a basic guarantee of physical survival. If you think medieval technology was limited to wooden carts and crooked plows, you are sorely mistaken. Large monasteries were the true Silicon Valleys of their harsh and unpredictable era. They urgently needed to automate routine physical processes to free up time for endless, lengthy prayers. And so they began building highly sophisticated, state-of-the-art water mills on rivers throughout Europe. It sounds mundane, but their ingenious mills performed far more than just the simple task of grinding grain. They harnessed the power of water to operate heavy forges, rapidly saw wood, and carry out large-scale fulling. Modern, experienced engineers are genuinely amazed at how precisely the transmission mechanisms made of ordinary wood were calculated. In some places, the complex water system was designed far better than the water supply in many modern cities. Water was channeled through specially dug artificial canals right across the entire complex. First, absolutely pure, ice-cold water flowed into the large kitchen for preparing food and drinks. Then the powerful stream passed through washrooms, laundries, and workshops, turning the heavy wheels of the machines. And only at the very end did this same water effectively flush waste from the toilets directly into the fast-flowing river. This is a brilliant multi-level system of cascading resource use, centuries ahead of its time. Even today, environmentalists are desperately trying to implement similar principles of waste-free, eco-friendly production. The construction of such gigantic stone complexes required immense knowledge of geometry and the mechanics of materials. The architect brothers erected massive arches as tall as a modern 10-story apartment building. They used pieces of unfired limestone in the mortar to make it more pliable. For a long time, academic historians thought they were simply too lazy to properly grind the hard stone. But modern chemical analysis has shown that such inclusions allow cracks to self-heal under the influence of rainwater. They successfully created self-healing, strong concrete 1,000 years before modern certified materials scientists. Managing this incredibly complex enterprise required mathematical precision. These religious centers became the first true, powerful transnational corporations in history. They had a strict vertical hierarchy, a rigorous accounting system, and branches throughout continental Europe. The abbot functioned as a strict CEO, while the bursar served as the corporation's chief financial officer. They kept very detailed ledgers, recording every sack of grain spent or every nail forged. Communication between the order's various remote branches was organized at the highest level. They established their own rapid courier service, which regularly delivered important letters and orders across thousands of kilometers. It was a true medieval version of corporate email, except that important messages were delivered by live horses. Thanks to this, top management always knew exactly where resources were in surplus and where a serious crisis was brewing. Modern logistics giants study their methods of moving goods between distant regions with great interest. The scale of this closed agricultural production defies imagination even today. The Cistercian order, for example, controlled vast flocks of purebred sheep, producing the finest wool on the continent. They served as the primary monopoly suppliers of valuable raw materials to the international markets of the time. This made them incredibly wealthy, despite the strict personal vows of poverty taken by each individual member of the Brotherhood. It sounds very hypocritical, but it allowed this vast system to survive and expand amid the conditions of feudal fragmentation. They wisely invested their profits in purchasing new lands and building larger, more advanced mills. The secret to their phenomenal economic success lay in the complete absence of any payroll costs. The entire massive workforce labored absolutely for free, motivated solely by faith and fear of the underworld. No modern high-tech company could compete with a business where employees work hard for food and the promise of salvation. At the same time, work discipline was maintained at the level of a maximum security prison through physical punishment. If you were late for a grueling shift in the sweltering bakery, you would receive a lash of the whip and a dose of endless penitential prayers. As a result, we see a truly striking picture of stark contrast within a single, closed-off space. People who wore coarse, prickly robes and slept on straw confidently mastered the most advanced technologies of their era. They voluntarily renounced all earthly comforts for the sake of endlessly amassing vast resources for their powerful order. This is a historical paradox that actually allowed them to preserve European civilization during its darkest periods. Without their fanatical obsession with hard work and order, much of ancient knowledge would have been lost forever. Being sick in those distant Middle Ages was incredibly terrifying, but here you had at least some real chance of survival. They built the first organized system of real hospitals in Europe from scratch after the final fall of the Roman Empire. Every large stone complex necessarily included a warm infirmary for sick and elderly, infirm brothers. There, completely different, much gentler rules of daily survival applied. The sick were allowed to eat cooked meat, sleep much more, and legally skip the exhausting cold night vigils. That's why some crafty malingerers were willing to do anything just to get a week of long-awaited rest. For some reason, regular copious bloodletting was considered the main universal medical procedure of the time. It sounds like absolute madness, but monks were bled several times a year under the strictest mandatory order. The procedure was officially called minution and was a whole sacred ritual that exempted one from hard labor for 3 days. Why voluntarily drain a whole liter of vital warm fluid from one's body? It was believed that this reliably rid the body of bad humors and greatly reduced sinful physical desires. In essence, they artificially induced anemia in people so that healthy men would become calmer and more docile. Modern scientific hematology, of course, is absolutely horrified by such strange preventive treatment methods. The loss of a massive volume of blood severely weakens the immune system and makes a person extremely vulnerable to various infections. But the local doctor's iron surgical instruments were always thoroughly washed with wine or boiling water before use. Powerful painkillers, as we understand them today, simply did not exist in nature back then. For very complex surgeries, they used special large sponges generously soaked in poppy and belladonna juice. The patient would inhale these toxic fumes deeply and quickly, fall into a deep, almost comatose sleep before the incision. Today, experienced anesthesiologists spend years learning to precisely calculate the safe dosage of strong drugs for each individual. Medieval physicians did this by eye, seriously risking sending a patient to heaven a little earlier than intended. But that was far better than enduring the slow amputation of a limb while fully conscious. The primary and most reliable weapon against all illnesses was the various medicinal herbs grown in apothecary gardens. They had an intimate knowledge of hundreds of plant species and their precise chemical effects on the weakened human body. Bitter willow bark was successfully used to quickly reduce fever hundreds of years before the invention of the familiar aspirin. Modern complex chemistry has fully confirmed that willow bark contains salicylic acid, the main active ingredient in aspirin. They successfully treated sick people with the very same medicine, simply in the form of a bitter-tasting decoction made from the bark. Thick honey mixed with strong vinegar was often used to treat deep stab wounds. It sounds more like strange ingredients for a marinade than a serious, reliable medical remedy. However, the high acidity of the caustic vinegar and the osmotic pressure of the honey physically destroyed the thin cell walls of dangerous bacteria. Microbes literally burst and explode upon direct contact with such an aggressive and very sweet environment. This ancient, simple recipe has proven in practice to be more reliable than many expensive chemical developments of the 20th century. It is interesting to note the attitude toward cleanliness and hygiene, which differed greatly from popular myths about the incredibly dirty Middle Ages. The strict rules of many orders clearly prescribed mandatory thorough washing before every meal. Inside the buildings, elaborate, long stone wash basins with running ice-cold water were specially constructed right next to the refectory. A full, relaxing soak in a hot bath was considered an unallowable luxury and was permitted only a few times a year. But regularly washing dirty hands and faces saved communities from many dreadful epidemics that raged in filthy cities. The problem of unbearable toothache was always solved as radically, quickly, and brutally as possible. If a tooth began to hurt badly, it was simply pulled out with huge iron pliers without any long, comforting conversations. Tooth decay was quite rare due to the complete absence of harmful refined sugar in the meager diet. But very coarse bread containing small fragments of hard millstones quickly wore down the tooth enamel to the very root. By the age of 50, many of the monastery's elderly residents could chew only soft, mashed porridge. The most striking thing about their primitive medicine is the very detailed and accurate medical records. They meticulously recorded the symptoms, the bitter decoctions administered, and the final outcome of the long treatment for each patient. This was the first tentative step toward true evidence-based medicine, grounded in statistics and patient observation. If a pungent garlic ointment failed to help 3 people in a row, it was simply crossed out of the thick reference book. Your modern, thick medical record at the clinic is the direct descendant of those ancient parchment manuscripts. Of course, many of their archaic methods today elicit only an indulgent, ironic smile from true professionals. Attempts to treat a high fever by applying slippery leeches to the forehead seem very strange and utterly unscientific. But in the absence of powerful microscopes and modern antibiotics, they actually achieved incredible things. They created a functional system of care firmly grounded in cleanliness, strict rest, and herbal pharmacology. And in most cases, it truly worked far better than the dubious magic or incantations of ignorant village healers. We've grown accustomed to thinking of modern libraries as the safest and most incredibly quiet places in the world. But in a cramped medieval scriptorium, the production of heavy books was a truly hazardous and highly toxic process. Creating a single beautiful manuscript required close contact with incredibly dangerous chemicals every single day. To obtain very bright colors for beautiful illustrations, artisans constantly used heavy metals and poisons. The famous cinnabar produced a beautiful, rich red color, but consisted entirely of pure toxic mercury ore. Artists slowly poisoned themselves while creating magnificent masterpieces that would endure for centuries. The durable green paint used to depict trees on thick parchment was no less hazardous to health. It was often made from compounds of oxidized copper and deadly toxic arsenic powder. Scribes had a very bad habit of constantly licking the tip of their brush to make it sharper for fine details. Modern toxicologists understand that this is the surest path to severe systemic poisoning. Symptoms of such a terrible poisoning included massive tooth loss, severe joint pain, and the gradual destruction of the nervous system. They literally sacrificed their physical health page by page in order to preserve valuable information. Ink, too, was never the harmless product made from forest berries that many sincerely believe it to be. The famous black iron gall ink was made from growths on oak leaves, iron sulfate, and a corrosive acid. This black mixture was so corrosive that over time it literally burned right through the thick parchment. If this dangerous liquid splashed into a person's eyes, they could be permanently blinded. Workers had to handle such toxic acid for long hours in a dim, stuffy room by the faint light of a candle. The lighting conditions in large scriptoria were a separate and very serious problem for human eyesight. Using a bright open flame near very dry parchment was strictly forbidden due to the high risk of fire. A single clumsy, careless movement with a burning candle could destroy the work of hundreds of people over many years in a matter of minutes. Therefore, the focused scribes worked mainly by the dim natural light streaming through small, narrow windows. When the long winter set in, daylight hours were drastically reduced, and the strain on their already ailing eyes became simply unbearable. Ophthalmologists today know full well that prolonged visual focusing in the dark inevitably causes severe accommodation spasm. After several years of such painstaking work, people began to catastrophically lose their natural visual acuity. But corrective glasses were not invented until the very end of the 13th century in distant, sunny Italy. Until then, a half-blind, experienced scribe became completely useless to the scriptorium and was sent to do menial labor. Losing one's sight meant instantly losing one's high status within the rigid monastic hierarchy. This is an extremely harsh corporate reality, where only your ability to produce the desired product is highly valued. The lengthy process of preparing the parchment itself was an even dirtier and incredibly repulsive task. Heavy animal hides had to be soaked in huge vats of caustic lime solution for weeks on end. This aggressive solution quickly dissolved the remaining flesh and fur, but it just as easily corroded the skin on the workers' hands. Standing knee-deep in the foul-smelling sludge was a constant duty for the apprentices at the very bottom of the hierarchy. The stench around such workshops was so monstrous that they were always built in the most remote corners. Stretching the wet hide tightly over large wooden frames required immense physical strength in the back and arms. The damp material had to be scraped with curved, sharp knives so delicately as not to accidentally cut a hole. One accidental wrong move, and the expensive hide was sent to the trash, while the culprit received severe punishment. To provide constant protection against voracious rodents, libraries kept special squads of trained, hungry cats. Rats and mice simply adored eating the delicious parchment, natural glue, and leather bindings of ancient books. Marginal notes in some manuscripts desperately complain that a cat urinated right on the sacred text. It was an endless war of attrition to preserve priceless information against wild nature and pests. Today we store terabytes of data in a secure cloud, but they entrusted their knowledge to the instincts of small predators. Preserving important ancient knowledge under such harsh conditions was a true act of endless human stubbornness. They diligently copied ancient authors, works on medicine and geometry, often without even understanding their meaning. Thanks to this incredibly grueling process, the important works of Aristotle and Galen have nevertheless reached us. This arduous, exhausting labor in toxic scriptoria literally saved the entire foundation of modern science. And it was accomplished by people whose real names have forever remained unknown in the grand sweep of history. Enduring constant physical deprivation is difficult, but the daily psychological pressure was even more terrifying. A person voluntarily renounced their own will entirely, submitting completely to all the abbot's decisions. The strict rules clearly state that any display of individuality is a form of immense pride and a mortal sin. Psychologists refer to this harsh process as the complete de-individualization of the human personality. Such methods are now successfully used in the training of soldiers in modern elite military units. They completely break you down as a person in order to reassemble you as a perfect, flawless cog in the larger system. Punishments for various offenses were not only moral, but also quite painful physical ones. For very minor violations, the guilty party was deprived of a portion of beer or forced to eat while lying on the stone floor near the entrance to the refectory. For more serious offenses, Public flogging with birch rods or long leather whips was administered. Most modern people would simply quit after the very first stern reprimand from their boss. But medieval laborers endured these stinging blows in silence, considering them a thoroughly deserved purification. The most terrifying and severe punishment was considered to be complete excommunication from the community and solitary confinement in a dungeon. Very large abbeys had their own deep stone dungeons without a single window. An offender could easily be locked up there for several long months on stale bread and musty water in complete darkness. Complete sensory deprivation is sure to drive an unprepared person mad in just a few short weeks. Not every unfortunate prisoner managed to endure such a horrific ordeal and retain their sanity. It was an incredibly cruel but extremely effective system for suppressing any possible rebellions and dissent. It's interesting to see how they coped with this constant stress under such unbearable conditions. They had absolutely no access to psychotherapists or modern antidepressants, so they relied on a strict routine. A strict, unchanging schedule, where every minute of the day is accounted for, gives the brain a soothing sense of predictability. Neurobiologists confirm that a very strict schedule significantly reduces anxiety levels in uncontrollable, frightening situations. When you know exactly what you'll be doing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 10 years from now, the frightening uncertainty disappears completely. In addition, hard physical labor effectively burns off stress hormones like cortisol in the blood. After 10 grueling hours of work in the field, you simply don't have the energy left for deep existential crises. This is a very primitive but incredibly reliable and effective mechanism for protecting the psyche from nervous overload. Many incredibly successful people today intuitively adopt the same regimen of strict Spartan discipline. The only difference is that modern people do it for the sake of a successful business, not for the sake of religion. A particularly difficult problem in a large closed male community was the suppression of the most basic instincts. The rules strictly forbade even looking young novices in the eye, lest they accidentally provoke temptation. The brothers slept in huge communal dormitories by the dim light of a lamp, so that everyone was always completely visible. Solitude was permitted only for the oldest, most experienced hermits who had already proven their incredible fortitude. The entire interior architecture of the building was designed to ensure maximum, total control over every person. It was a veritable stone medieval panopticon where the thick walls literally always had eyes. Death in this harsh system was perceived quite differently than in our modern world. People prepared for it every single day, viewing a long earthly life as nothing more than a very difficult temporary training. When an old brother died, he was carefully laid on the floor, sprinkled with gray ashes in the shape of a cross. Others were always nearby, monotonously reciting prayers without a single break for sleep. There was no animal fear or panic, only a very calm conclusion to a long and incredibly difficult working contract. The cemetery was always located right in the inner courtyard, reminding everyone of the inevitable finitude of existence. They would often calmly dig up the bones of past generations to make room for new, fresh burials. This entire complex and rigid psychological system persisted almost unchanged for hundreds of long years. It proved incredibly resilient to the most terrifying external crises, devastating wars and epidemics. While vast secular empires crumbled, these closed communities continued to work methodically and laboriously, copying books. Their methods of mind control seriously anticipated many discoveries of modern complex crowd psychology and personnel management. Severe, harsh discipline transformed ordinary, weak people into an indomitable, great historical force. Life in a medieval closed monastery was incredibly far removed from romantic notions of quiet thinkers. It was an extremely harsh school of survival, requiring incredible physical endurance and sheer iron will. These people were the very first to apply the principles of industrial zero-waste production, mass agriculture, and highly complex logistics. Modern cutting-edge science is only now beginning to deeply understand the physiological mechanisms they used entirely intuitively. Their remarkable endurance was the result of a perfect combination of strict discipline, hard labor, and a relentless routine. It sounds incredibly daunting, But it was precisely this strict system that helped Europe avoid descending into complete savagery. The next time you complain bitterly about lack of sleep or the cold weather, think of them. Think of the people who slept on straw for years and changed the course of history by copying books in an icy stone hall. History convincingly proves a simple truth. The human body is capable of enduring far more than we are accustomed to thinking. The main thing is to always have a reason strong and important enough to wake up every day. And these stern medieval engineers of faith certainly always had such a reason.